Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Museum of Science Live. If you're on Zoom, we do have closed captioning available, and you can turn those on by selecting the CC or closed caption button at the bottom of your screen and selecting Show Subtitles. In just a few moments, we will be meeting our educator who will be taking us on a tour of the sky tonight. My name is Francisca. I use she and her pronouns, and I will be your moderator today. And although you see me now, you'll mostly be hearing my voice throughout the rest of the presentation as I share your questions or observations with our educators. If you're watching us on Zoom, you can submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And if you're watching us on Facebook or on YouTube, we won't be able to get to your comments, but we're happy to have you with us today, and we hope you enjoy our program. Now that we know how our session will work, I'd like to please invite our educator to turn on their camera and introduce themselves to start.
Hi, everybody. My name is Talia. I use she, her pronouns, and I am going to be your presenter today. We're going to be talking about some constellations that you can see in the sky, and we're going to be focusing a bit on some constellations that you have probably heard of, heard a lot about, but maybe don't know why those constellations are considered special. So to help us out, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm running a program called Stellarium, which is a free open source software. It's great for looking at things in the night sky. I have it set for tonight at 9 o'clock from the Boston area. And right now we're looking north to, you can see, you know, familiar things like the Big Dipper over here in the northwest is nice and visible. The moon just getting ready to set in the west at 9 o'clock. And as we scroll around to the southern part of the sky, there are, of course, a couple of really nice bright planets that are super visible. So if you have any interest in checking out planets, Saturn and Jupiter are very well placed in the early evening sky. They're easy to spot. They're going to be the brightest things visible. So you can spot them. But we also have a lot of constellations. And if you've been watching these sky to night shows throughout the last few months, you probably heard us talk about some of these constellations. And I'll point out some of the ones that are well placed for viewing tonight. I'm going to start with this one right over here, dominating a big chunk of the southern sky, anchored by this bright red star, Antares. Now, Antares, you will notice, is a red star. And so its name, roughly translated, means not Mars, because it is a red object in the part of the sky that Mars often appears in. So it is called not Mars. But it is part of a constellation that has a few different parts to it. The major part is this curling line right here. And then this area right here. And I think to make sure that I'm not going to just show you everything, we will so take a look at some of these awesome settings. And I can't remember where the setting I want is. So we won't do that at all. So does anybody happen to know which constellation this is? And I'll go ahead and put, I'm going to go ahead and put some stick figures up. It's going to be stick figures for all the constellations, but the one I want you to focus on is this one right here. So if you know what that is or want to take a guess, go ahead and put your answer in the Q&A. You can also put a question mark. You should always feel free to put a question mark if you don't know the answer to a question.
Let's see, we have a couple of question marks and then a few guesses for Scorpion or Scorpio.
This is in fact correct. This is the constellation known as Scorpius. Scorpius is the constellation name, and it is a scorpion. You can see this curling tail, and here's the Antares is his heart, and you can see his head and his two claws right here. And then right next to Scorpius in the sky is another constellation right here, which if you can't, if you don't have these constellation lines up, the easiest part of it to find is the teapot shape right here. You've got the spout. There's the top of the teapot. Here's the handle and the bottom. And the Milky Way is steam coming out of the top of the teapot. Now, this one, the teapot is only part of the constellation. If I put the lines back up, you can see that there's a lot more to this constellation. And this is one we've mentioned before. It's not one that looks like what it's supposed to be. The scorpion actually kind of looks like a scorpion in the sky. This one really doesn't look like what it is supposed to be. But if you happen to know what it is, go ahead and put its name in the comments, in the Q&A. If you would like to say what you think it looks like, go ahead and put that in the Q&A, or you can always put a question mark.
All right, let's see. We have Mayuro, age 11, guesses maybe Sagittarius. We have a few question marks and a few guesses for a bear or a dead giraffe.
Dead giraffe? I can see a dead giraffe there. It is in fact the constellation Sagittarius, which doesn't tell you what it is supposed to be. This is supposed to be an archer, specifically a centaur archer. It is a half human, half horse archer. And I'm sure that's totally what you see in that shape, right? Yeah, no, it's not. And right next to it is another one over here that looks absolutely nothing like what it is supposed to be. And if I take the lines away, the easiest way to find this one is to look for this sort of, I always think of it as a crescent moon shape right here in the sky, or kind of a triangle, a little bit of a triangular shape. This is another one that looks absolutely nothing like what it is supposed to be. So if you happen to know what this one is, go ahead and put its name in the Q&A. If you would like to say again what you think this looks like, go ahead and put that in the Q&A. And again, you can always put a question mark, because if you don't already know what this is supposed to be, you're never going to guess it.
Let's see. We have a couple of guesses. Jacob, age 5, says maybe a horse. Mayuro, age 11, says Aries. We have a few guesses for a ram, a tent, mountains, maybe teeth, and then a few question marks.
You mean nobody guessed the goatfish?
Oh.
This is in fact the constellation Capricornus, and Capricornus is a goatfish. It is just like the centaur has the upper body of a human and the lower body of a horse. Capricornus, for reasons that I don't know, has the forward body of a goat and the back half of a fish. So I'll go ahead and put some art up there so you can see what I'm talking about for all the constellations, but for these three in particular. There's your scorpion. Here is your centaur archer, and there is your goatfish. So now Scorpius, Sagittarius, and Capricornus all belong to a specific set of constellations that you've probably heard of that are usually held to be a little bit special. Now, what group of constellations is that? Go ahead and remember, you can put a question mark. But if you know what group of constellations that Capricornus, Sagittarius, and Scorpius all belong to, go ahead and put that in the Q&A.
Such a good question. We'll give you guys a few seconds to think about it.
I can give you a little bit of another hint. Let's use the labels instead. On the other side of Capricornus, you will find Aquarius. On the other side of Scorpius, you will find Libra and Virgo. These are also belonging to that same group of constellations.
Ooh, we're getting guesses. Let's see. Zodiac signs, Big Dipper, and a lot of question marks. So you picked us, Talia.
So this group of constellations is part of what we call the Zodiac. And they're ones you may have heard a lot more about, because if you flip to the horoscope page in a newspaper, it will have there will be 12 constellation names that they use as your sign, as they say. Now, what is special about these 12 constellations? You can see they are next to each other. They form a line in the sky. Here's Pisces, Aquarius, Capricornus, Sagittarius, Scorpius, Libra, Virgo. And then there are others below the horizon. So they make a line in the sky. Does anybody happen to know what is significant about these constellations? Why this group is held separate? Does anybody happen to know? You can, of course, put a question mark.
Let's see. Astrology? Question marks. Earth's path?
Now they do get used for astrology. That is where those horoscope pages in the newspaper come from. But the reason that these 12 in a line are considered significant, well, to show that, what I'm going to do, first of all, is use another handy part of Stellarium where I can just turn the atmosphere off. And I'm going to do that because I'm going to run time backwards to 12 noon today. So here's the sky. These are all the stars that are above the horizon during the daytime. You can see Orion over here. He's a one that a lot of people like, but we're going to go up. So we are going to go look at where the sun is. And this is a constellation you may or may not have heard of. It is the constellation Leo. Leo is a zodiac constellation. On either side of it, you have Cancer, you have Virgo. On the other side of Cancer, you have Gemini, you have Taurus. These are the zodiac constellations, and they are considered, they have this sort of special designation because they are the constellations that, as Earth orbits the sun, these are the constellations that the sun appears to travel through. So it's not the path of the Earth, it's the path of the sun. Because as Earth moves around the sun every year, its daytime side is facing different parts of space at different times of the year. And so if you were wondering why, when you look at, say, when we were looking at Scorpius, if your sign is Scorpio, that doesn't, you might have been wondering, wait, why am I able to see it in the summer if the time of year when the newspaper says I'm a Scorpius is in the fall or even the winter? It's not because it's the time of year that it's up at night. It's the time of the year it's up during the day. So your sign is supposed to be the constellation that the sun was in on the day you were born. And historically, astrologers have put a lot of significance on what that means, on what constellation that the sun was in on the day you were born. You can, find a lot of stuff, especially online, about what all that means. But all it means is which patch of space the sun was in on a specific date. And I want you to notice something as we look at these constellations. These are the ones that are up today. During the day, you've got Virgo over here. That's a pretty big constellation. Leo, it's a medium-sized constellation. Cancer's pretty small. Gemini's medium-sized. Taurus is pretty big. Aries, that is all of Aries. Aries is really tiny. So these constellations, you will notice, they're not the same size. They are very different sizes. But if you ever look at the the horoscope in the newspaper, it divides the year up into 12 equal segments. So that would assume that the sun spends the same amount of time in each constellation. Do you think that's true? You think the sun spends as much time in Cancer, in the region of the sky that we call the constellation Cancer, as it does in the patch of sky taken up by the constellation Virgo? Go ahead and put an answer in the Q&A.
We're getting lots of no's.
That is correct. The sun is Earth is just moving around. The sun appears to move through all these constellations, but it moves through them in different amounts of time, which is one of the reasons why your newspaper horoscope is probably wrong. Sorry. And that's only one of the reasons. I'm going to bring us back to tonight. I'm going to bring us back to 9 o'clock where we started. So we are looking again at our familiar buddies. Of course, turning off the atmosphere means we can now see all the stars. So these two constellations are in a very, very crowded patch of sky. but you can still see Sagittarius over here, and here is Scorpius. And right next to Scorpius, in between Scorpius and Virgo, is a tiny constellation, Libra. And Libra is one of the 12 zodiac signs. But it wasn't always. Here's the funny thing about Libra. Libra used to be part of Scorpius. So here we can see it. If we put the art on, you can see Scorpius ends with these 3 stars above Antares. And then there's these stars that make up Libra. It's supposed to be a set of scales, but that was not always the case. In fact, originally, Scorpius didn't end here. Scorpius went all the way up here, and these things that are the scales of Libra were the massive claws of the scorpion once upon a time. Because the way we view the constellations has changed a lot over time. But the idea of there being 11 constellations that the sun traveled through, that felt untidy. It didn't suit the belief systems at the time. So it made more sense for there to be 12, an even number, a number divisible by 6. It was nice. So they actually split Libra off of Scorpius in order to make a 12th zodiac constellation. Now, I might be blowing people's minds. I don't know. Sometimes people get really, really shocked when I tell them that the sign that they think the sun was in on the day they were born was probably not. So before I continue, Francisca, are there any questions I ought to answer?
No questions just yet. I think we're curious about how many like total constellations we have in our sky, but nothing yet about astrology.
There are 88 total constellations. And what we do in the way, what I'm saying, what constellation the sun is in, it's because we actually break the sky up. It's not just the patch of sky that the stars take up. There's actually a chunk of sky around Scorpius that is considered to be Scorpius, even though it's not part of the stick figure. That patch of sky belongs to Scorpius. And same up here, there is a patch of sky that belongs to Aquila that expands beyond what the actual stars in the constellations are. So there's 88 patches of sky. Each one has a constellation in it. And before we talk about why this happens with these particular constellations, I'm going to maybe blow your mind a little bit more. We'll see. I'm going to jump time again. We're going to go back to 12 noon because, as we've seen, that's a good time to see what constellation the sun is in on a given day. And now we're going to jump ahead to, I'm going to do middle of December. So let's do, December 15th. Which constellation, this is where the sun is in. So now this is, several months in the future, the sun is now up at the same time as Sagittarius and Antares. So Sagittarius and Antares are up during the daytime. Which constellation would you say the sun is in right now? Go ahead and put an answer in the Q&A. Remember, you can always put a question mark if you would like.
Let's see. We're getting a guess for Sagittarius. Lots of question marks.
Well, this is where things get a little funny because it is not in Scorpius. It is not in Sagittarius. It's in Fucus. This constellation up here, a constellation you have probably never heard of, but if we zoom in, you can see that the sun is actually touching this, like it's actually over the stars of the constellation. It is very squarely in the patch of sky dominated by the constellation of Fucus. It is undeniably in this constellation. There is actually a 13th zodiac constellation. I have yet to have anybody actually claim to be in a Fucan, but there is actually a 13th constellation that the sun passes through over the course of the year. And it is the constellation of Fucus, the serpent bearer. The guy holding a snake. So these are the constellations that the sun's path appears to bring it through as the Earth is going around the sun. These are also the same constellations that you will find. You can see the moon is in the same patch of sky. Mercury and Venus are in the same patch of sky. Saturn and Jupiter. All the solar system objects appear to pass through these particular constellations. It's no wonder that ancient people thought that they were special. But now the question is, why does everything from the solar system, all the solar system objects, appear to pass through that patch of sky? I'm going to share a different screen. And while I do that, if you think you have an answer or you would like to guess, put it in the Q&A or put a question mark. And I'm going to jump to a different screen while you do that. All right, Francisca, do we have any guesses? Anything people would like to share?
No guesses, but we do have some question marks.
Excellent. I love a good question mark. So I've now jumped us to a different program. This one is called Worldwide Telescope. And it's showing us from a view from space. So this is the solar system. This really wonky orbit belongs to Pluto. But this is, look at the orbits of the planets. What do you notice about them?
Let's see, Jacob, age 5, is guessing that it's because of the way the Earth rotates for your last question. But Daniel is noticing that all the planets are on the same plane.
Yep, that's a big one. So Pluto over here is being weird, but the planets, their orbits are pretty flat. They're all nice and roundish when you look at them from the top, but when you look at them from the side, it's almost like the whole solar system's a pancake. It's really wide from one angle, but really flat from another. And that plane, that line that you can draw through, through the solar system there, it's called the ecliptic. So it's like the word eclipse, ecliptic. And I'm gonna put the constellations up now. And I'll even put the constellation. Yeah, we'll leave the pictures off, actually. It's easier to see. Now, if I rotate around so that we keep the solar system looking flat, notice what that ecliptic is passing through. There's Sagittarius. There's Capricornus. There's Aquarius. There is Pisces. These are the constellations of the zodiac. They happen to be the constellations that line up with the ecliptic, that plane that our flat solar system has, that everything in the solar system, all the major objects of the solar system, the planets, our moon, the sun, everything appears very close to that line. And that line happens to run through those 12 constellations, 13 constellations. And that is why those are the constellations that the sun appears to pass through over the course of the year. And that is why ancient people decided those constellations were special. And that is why they attributed special predictive abilities, the ability to predict things about a person, to which of those constellations the sun was in on the day they were born. And that is why a belief which many people still hold today. And like I said, I'm going to jump us back to Stellarium. You can see these constellations throughout the year. We'll jump back to today, which is the 21st, to end our program. And we'll jump back to 9 o'clock. So you can see some of these constellations. Tonight, you can see Virgo just setting in the west. Scorpius and Sagittarius are dominating the southern sky right now. And over in the east, you can see the head of Pisces, the fish, beginning to rise. And as the year goes on, you're going to see different ones of those constellations. And when you look at them, you are looking at the path that the sun takes across the sky. And that is why those particular constellations are considered special. I think we have time for a few questions before we end today. Is that right, Francisca?
Yeah, definitely. We have, you talked about we can see the constellations. Are there any planets we can see tonight? Faith H9 is wondering.
Absolutely, right in Sagittarius, Saturn and Jupiter. Just go out as soon as the sun goes down, look to the southern sky and look for the brightest things you can see. That is going to be the planet Jupiter will be the brightest thing you can see. And right next to it will be the planet Saturn, will be the second brightest. So there's definite planet viewing available tonight.
So cool. I'll have to look out for that too. And one last question, was the Cancer constellation part of another constellation before?
Not that I'm aware of. It is a small constellation and it's a very weak constellation in terms of the stars in it are not very bright. So it wouldn't surprise me, but I have no knowledge of that being formerly part of another constellation. It's right next to the constellation Leo, and Leo is a pretty complete picture on its own of a lion. And that is a constellation I believe is very old, the idea of that group of stars representing a lion.
Well, thank you, Talia. With that, we have reached the end of our program. I hope you can all join me in virtually thanking Talia for giving us such an awesome overview of the night sky and how it all ties to astrology, maybe killing a few of my astrology beliefs, but it's okay. So Talia, I'll ask you to say goodbye and turn off your camera. And thank you again for learning with us today. You can find all of our virtual offerings by visiting us online at the blue link on your screen, mos.org/MOS at home. And if you enjoyed our program and are able, we'll hope you consider making a donation to the Museum of Science. You can do that by visiting the red link on your screen, engage.mos.org/welcome. And your support can help us continue this programming. With that, have a good weekend and we'll see you next week.